Amalia from Armenia. Now I study in Paideia. I'm a fellow of Paideia. I want to introduce you Avigdor Shinan, a great professor about whom I have heard people coming here, even in Armenia. He's famous. Even I used some of his articles when I was writing my MA thesis, and it was great. And Avigdor Shinan was born in Prague. And then he immigrated to Israel, and he holds BA diploma from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, from Biblical Studies and Hebrew Literature department. And right after BA, he got his PhD. We know why. From Hebrew University as well. During his career, he was invited from 27 countries to give lectures to Yale University, Yeshiva University in New York, and other famous universities. His research interests include biblical interpretation, Mishnah, Targum, Jewish prayer book, Siddur, and also Midrashic and Aggadic, and others. And he wrote more than 10 books, 12 or 13, more than 10 books, and one of the most famous books, which was bestseller for 30 weeks in Israel, it's called That Is Not What's Said in the Bible, right? Yeah. And the movie. Yeah, the movie. Yes, they knew that he was invited by Steven Spielberg, everyone knows him, right? To Hollywood as a consultant for movie The Prince of Egypt about Moses. Yeah, and what else? Yeah, and
Russian, come on.
And he wrote more than 100 articles in various topics of biblical literature, interpretations, Midrash, and one of which I used in my thesis. Yeah, and well, I'm very happy to introduce him, and it's a great honor for all of us, for Paideia fellows. We enjoy his lectures. It's like I cannot describe what it is. We're entering the classroom, and we're coming out, and we have this impression the whole day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I never dreamt in my life that I will be introduced in Sweden by a woman from Armenia. That's our life. And I'm quite sure that if I would, instead of speaking about the subject, tell you my adventure in Hollywood as the counselor of the Prince of Egypt, you would enjoy it much more. But let's now stay with the subject that I like to speak with, and I hope that everyone got handouts that were prepared. I'd like first of all to thank the Paideia people for re-inviting me for the 6th or 7th times. I've got already in a row to come and teach here. I see it as a sign of trust in me, but me coming is a sign of trust in Paideia and its students. Some of them are here, and I really appreciate them coming here today. Again, after studying, but before I was already this very morning. Besides, some of what I'm going to say, I already talked to my students, so they came again to see whether I changed my mind. Maybe I've improved a little, or probably with this. Anyhow, I know that my colleague Professor Zakovich, was standing here about 2 weeks ago, maybe exactly 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And he spoke about the Bible and the Big Bang of Jewish culture, and I told him that I am going to continue what he was speaking about by giving one example how this book, the Bible, which is not a very great book when it comes to number of words, but it's the greatest book ever written in Jewish, Christian, and even Muslim, in a way, in Muslim context as well, huge book which hundreds of thousands of people, maybe 10,000 of people, went back to read it and reread it and look at every element in it and try to understand every part of it, believing, especially in the religious context, that this book is the words of God, the living God, and each generation was asking what answers this book can offer me for my problems, or what messages this book is offering us for our time and place. And I'd like just to show you how this Big Bang developed in one case, in one example. We'll take one biblical story that was read last Shabbat in the synagogues and see how this story was developed in 3 stages out of how many stages it really went through. My intention basically is just to explain what Yair Zakovich said about the power of the biblical text to cause new generation to go back to this text who never died, which never lost its effects and importance, and we read it again, dealing with it, finding new ideas that maybe were not there in previous generations, and by that keeping that book is the basic book, living book, instructing book, and a book that no religion can live without, so I believe. So basically we'll take one story, a short one that was read last Shabbat. Let's read the story first, and then I'll try to show you very briefly 3 different ways in which this story was discussed in 3 different languages. We read all of them in English, but the text that we will be reading were in Greek, were in Aramaic, were in Hebrew. They were composed by 3 different authors, in 3 different places, in 3 different social, historical contexts, and still they all belong to the same pyramid, as I usually call it. It was built on every element in the Bible. This is upside down pyramid. The Bible being the base, and every generation came back to the story and developed it and expanded it in many ways. And let's look at the text and its interpretations, and I hope that this short lecture will be a good example of what my friend Yair Zakovich was speaking about. So you may remember that last week we read about Abraham. The first time he's mentioned in the Torah, and the first time he's mentioned, he's 75 years old, with old woman, barren woman, no children, living comfortably there in Mesopotamia, in a very cultured place, and suddenly he hears the voice of God, who's telling him, go to the land of Canaan, that later on became the land of Israel, and God promises Abraham both the land and offsprings. And Abraham goes. He believes and he goes. And the next story after this great example of belief in God is the story which we're going to read now, text number 8, which describes a totally different Abraham. You almost cannot coincide between the two, make a compromise between the two Abraham. The Abraham, the great believer, and now the Abraham, the way he behaved once there was a famine in the land. And I'm reading text number 8 with no comments, and then we'll discuss the text and how different readers of the text dealt with it when they felt they have to do it. And there was a famine in the land. And Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was sore in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that's a translation, that he said to Sarah his wife, behold now, I know that you are a fair woman to look upon. By the way, she's 65 years old. That's very nice. A woman is beautiful in the eyes of her husband, even she's 95. So I know that you are a fair woman to look upon. And it will come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see you, then that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me. But you, they will keep alive. So please say, I pray you, you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that my soul may live because of you. And it came to pass that when Abraham was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. And the princess of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he, Pharaoh, dealt with Abram for her sake. And he had Abram sheep and oxen and he-asses and menservants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you hast done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did I say to you, she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now, therefore, behold thy wife. Take her and go thy way." And Pharaoh gave men charge concerning him, and they brought him on the way, and his wife, and all that he had. This story portrays a secular different Abraham, and it raises many problems that readers in all places, in all times, encountered when they had to do with this story. Let me just mention 7 of the questions that the story may bring forward, and then we'll see how 3 different readers try to solve these problems and what can be learned from their attempt. First of all, remember, Abraham just left his family and his land and went to the land of Canaan with deep belief in God. And the first thing, there's a famine, he's running from the land, going to Egypt. Where is your belief, Abraham? Where is your trust in God? If you left Mesopotamia in trust, why didn't you stay here and trust God to help you? More than that, speaking to Abraham. Usually, when people are in distress, they speak to God. They pray. So later, Jacob, when there was famine in the land, and others pray to God, speak to Him, ask His mercy, ask His help, ask His help. But Abraham, the first thing is running to Egypt without asking God's help or praying to Him. And the moment he comes to Egypt, he cares for himself. He's telling Sarah, "You are beautiful, they're going to take you and kill me. Please say that you are my sister for my sake, that I will be saved." What about Sarah? And the big question, did Abraham lie when he asked Sarah to say that she was his sister? It's a real problem. When you read Genesis 12, and did not read yet the other chapters of the Bible, you get the impression that it's not true. It's just a lie that was made in order to save Abraham's life. But didn't Abraham think about the consequences of this lie? Because once he introduced Sarah as his sister, and she was a beautiful woman, Pharaoh, who loved beautiful women, took Sarah for his wife. And what really happened behind the closed doors of Pharaoh's chambers? Everyone asked himself, did Pharaoh touch Sarah? Anything happened between them? Pharaoh admits, as you can see, that he took Sarah as a wife. And we understand that when a man takes a wife, he takes her to live with her a full marital life. So what happened between Sarah and Abraham? It's very embarrassing even to think that something did happen at that time, but that's what the story is implying. Besides that, what do you think about a man who gets money for a woman that he gives to somebody else? Pharaoh gave Sarah Abraham gave Sarah to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh is giving him treasures, money, servants, and animals, etc. It's very uncomfortable to think about such a way, but that's what the story is telling us. Abraham is getting something for his wife. And of course the question, did anything happen between Sarah and Pharaoh? And then the question about God. If somebody is to be punished in this story, it's not Pharaoh. Think about it. The one person who correctly behaved in this story was Pharaoh. A new family comes to town, he sees a beautiful wife, he's asking who is she, he's told she is the sister of Mr. Abraham, and he takes her as a wife. Why would Pharaoh be punished and not Abraham for his behavior, for his lie, or Sarah, thank you, or Sarah for her agreeing to participate in this lie? God is here. The question again, why was Pharaoh punished? And maybe another question, a little one, how did Pharaoh find out that Sarah was the wife of Abraham and not his sister? The Torah doesn't tell us. So this short story, which I love very much because I believe that in Jewish tradition, no biblical figure is perfect. Without this story, Abraham would be described as almost a perfect person, the great believer. But this story shows us that there are other sides to human beings. Sometimes they fail, sometimes they make mistakes, sometimes they lose their faith, whatever. And that was so great about this story for me. Let me just mention a story, personal. Maybe I told my students, maybe I did not, never mind, maybe I did. A few years ago, I was invited to a conference which was held by the Palestinian Authority, by their cultural body, whatever, I forgot the name, of a Palestinian Authority in East Jerusalem. And I was invited with other 7 Israelis. We were 4 rabbis and 4 professors to go to East Jerusalem to meet 8 professors and 8 Muslims and 8 Christians to discuss our common father Abraham. The conference was called Abraham, Abraham, Ibrahim. Abraham the Hebrew, Abraham the English, and Ibrahim the Arab. And the idea was that 24 people, educated people, 4 professors of each denomination and 4 people of the religion, will meet and discuss Abraham. Maybe through Abraham and through the common tradition, we may advance somehow peace in the Middle East. We really hoped at that time that it's really possible by this way. And each of the group had to start the meeting by a short lecture. How is Judaism, Christianity, or Islam seeing Abraham, Ibrahim, Abraham? And I was chosen to speak for the Israeli, and I made a big mistake, not being aware of the other 2 groups, and I spoke about the complicated issue of Abraham. Abraham, the great believer, and Abraham, the sinner, or Abraham, the common man that may sometimes lose his faith, make mistakes, etc. I wanted to show that in Judaism, we should imitate people like Abraham, but never fall down on the earth and say holy, holy, holy to them. They are not to be, what's the word of this thing?
Worship.
Nope. Excuse me?
Worship.
Maybe worship, but imitated. And I cannot imitate a person unless he's a human being as I am. You can worship someone who's perfect. You cannot worship someone but you can imitate someone who looks like you. That was my thesis, and I brought a few examples, including this story and some other stories. And then both other groups, both Christians and Muslims, were petrified because they couldn't believe that anything can be said against Abraham. The Quran never says anything about Abraham. The New Testament says nothing against Abraham. In both these texts, the Quran, the Muslim and the Christian New Testament, Abraham is described in the greatest words and ways. And the whole meeting then was probably ruined from the very beginning because I brought in some negative approach to Abraham, and the rest of the story is not that important. But then I learned a big difference between the Jewish way of looking at figures like Abraham, David, not perfect. Joseph is far from perfect. Jacob is far from perfect. They are far from perfect. And the way other religions see these figures, including Muhammad, Jesus, etc. And it was, in a way, it was an interesting experience for me. But then I decided to be very careful when I speak about Abraham in negative terms before audiences, they may not like it. But as you can see, this story is part of the Bible, and it describes a very different Abraham from the one who heard the voice, Lech Lecha, go, and went and came to that piece of, or end of the world of that time, believing in God and His promises. Nonetheless, I'd like to see now 3 different readers, one in Greek, one in Aramaic, and one in Hebrew, in 3 different times, 3 different places and social contexts, dealing with the story and feeling that the story is minimizing the image of Abraham, did whatever they could in order to correct the biblical story, as opposed to my understanding, and try to describe him in the best of ways. And the 3 readers will be, first of all, the Jewish historians Flavius Josephus, who lived in the 1st century in a moment we'll say something about him. Then we are going back in history to a text that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the northern part of the Dead Sea, being part of the legacy of the sect of the Dead Sea Scrolls, whom I'll say something about in a second. And the third page, if time permits, is the same text. The third text, if time permits, will be a Midrash composed by the Rabbis much later. Josephus wrote in Greek. The text from the Dead Sea is Aramaic, and the Midrash is written in Hebrew. 3 different texts, 3 different genres, 3 different historical contexts, and still all of them are dealing with the biblical text and trying to solve, to relate to the same problems which we have just now enumerated. So let's first look at Mr. Josephus, Flavius, very prolific writer of the 1st century. He was born around the year 34 CE and died around the year 100. He started life as a scholar in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, a student at the yeshiva in Jerusalem, and everybody really believed that he will be one of the greatest rabbis of his time, but he made huge mistakes. He went into politics when he was 30 years old. We have to learn from that. If you want to go advance in academic circles, leave politics aside. He went into politics, and at the end he became the commander of the Galilee in the war against the Romans, and somehow, and exactly we do not know exactly how, he found his way at the end at Rome, sitting near the court of the emperor, getting a monthly pension by the emperor, and writing thousands of pages in dozens of books in Greek, both for the Jewish people of his time and especially for the common reader of the time, Roman and Greek-speaking people. And we'd like to see how he discusses our story in one of his books, in the book called The Antiquities of the Jews. Was written again in Rome at the end of the 1st century in Greek. The book, The Antiquities of the Jews, or the Jewish people of the Jews, is telling the history of the Jewish people from creation till his time. And among that, he's discussing our story. Now I'd like to read the story as Josephus retells it, and stops here and there to see how we reacted to the problems we have just enumerated. Now, says Josephus, text number B. Now, after this, when a famine had invaded the land of Canaan, and Abraham had discovered that the Egyptians were in a flourishing conditions, he was disposed to go down to Egypt, to them, both to partake of the plenty they enjoyed, and more important, and to become an auditor of their priests, and to know what they said concerning the gods, designing either to follow them, if they had better notions than he, or to convert them into a better way if his own notions proved the trust. Josephus is explaining that Abraham's going down to Egypt not for food, not his belly, not the hunger, but for philosophical, theological, missionary issues. He's going to discuss religion with the priests of Egypt, open to be convinced that his way is not the best way. If they convince him that the way they worship God is better than his, he would go their way. If not, he'll try to convince them to go in his own way. Josephus portrays Abraham, in this case, as a philosopher. The philosopher always goes with open mind to learn, to be convinced, or to convince others. That's the reason, says Josephus, that he's going down to Egypt, not for food, but for some spiritual mission of learning and teaching. Now, goes on Josephus, seeing he was to take Sarai with him, and he was afraid of the madness of the Egyptians with regard to women. So, yeah, right? He had a reason to be afraid. He knew that the Egyptians of his time are really crazy when they see women, so he had a reason to be afraid.
Sex maniac.
Well, I didn't want to say sex maniac, but this lady says sex maniac, I'm just citing her. Lest the king should kill him on occasion of his wife's great beauty, he contrived this device. Listen to this. He pretended to be her brother and directed her in a dissembling way to pretend the same, for he said it would be for their benefit. Very clever. Then Sarah never said that she was Abraham's sister. Josephus could not describe Abraham as someone who lies. But there is no reason why a couple who comes to a new place will not have two different rooms in the hotel, for example. They pretended to be strangers, right? Brother. So he wouldn't kiss her on the lips, and he will not hold her hand when they go down for breakfast, but they behave a brother and sister, and that's what Josephus does, because he feels he cannot describe to the Gentile world Abraham as a liar. So, probably people even clap their hands to the idea of Josephus. Abraham just pretended to be her brother, but never said she is my sister. Now, as soon as he came into Egypt, it happened to Abraham as he supposed it would. For the fame of his wife's beauty was greatly talked of, for which reason Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, would not be satisfied with what was reported of her, but would needs see her himself, and was preparing to enjoy her. But God put a stop to his unjust inclinations by sending upon him a distemper and a sedition against his government. Josephus makes sure that nothing happened between Pharaoh and Sarah. He wanted to enjoy her. Very nice way to say, have sex with her. He wanted to enjoy her. But God stopped it by political elements, some seditions against the government. He was too busy with the budget that had to be till midnight organized with the Senate, for example. It was, by the way, Barbara in America. So he was too busy, Pharaoh, in order to find some time to go to Sarah, and some distemper that I understand, going back to the Greek and the Hebrew, some sickness which prevented him from functioning in the sexual way a man should. So God stopped Pharaoh from his plan by this disease and political uproar. And when Pharaoh, inquired of the priests how he might be freed from these calamities, so now Josephus knows exactly how Pharaoh found out. They told him that his miserable condition was derived from the wrath of God upon account of his inclinations to abuse the stranger's wife. He then, out of fear, asked Sarai who she was and who it was that she brought along with her. And when he had found out the truth, he excused himself to Abraham, that supposing the woman to be his sister and not his wife, he set his affection on her, as desiring to an affinity with him by marrying her, but not as incited by lust to abuse her. He also made him a large present in money. Only now, at the end of the story, not for Sarah, but as a compensation. At the end, Abraham is getting a lot of money and gave him leave to enter into conversation with the most learned among the Egyptians, from which conversation his virtue and his reputation became more conspicuous than they had been before. He's not sending him away. And if you look at Josephus, you see that one by one, all of the questions that I made as a list were solved by Josephus. Let me remind you, Abraham was afraid correctly because the Egyptians were sex maniacs. Two, he was not lying, he just pretended to be Sarah's brother. 3, Pharaoh was punished because he intended to do something wrong. And nothing happened between Pharaoh and Sarah. The priest told Pharaoh who Sarah was. Abraham gets gifts, but not for Sarah, but as a compensation. And at the end, Abraham is not sent away from Egypt, but he can stay there and teach his beliefs, and by that his name became greater and more people appreciate Abraham. That's what Josephus is telling. Any question here? So let's go on. You may say, okay, well, Josephus, you're writing to those who do not know the Bible. The people who read Josephus, the educated people in Rome, did not care about the Jewish Bible. No one of them ran to open the Bible and see whether Josephus is correct or not. And even the Jewish people who read this book maybe were not so knowledgeable to know exactly what he was doing. But he is really twisting the story by describing it differently, saving the honor of Abraham and of Sarah, of the Jewish people. But the question is, will other sources who were Jewish readers, who may have known the biblical text, did they behave the same way? The answer is yes. I'd like to show you two ways how it was done. The first, and up till now, my students heard it in class. From now on, it will be new for them as well. Shoel?
Is it possible to read Josephus, the beginning part, as something, as an excuse, like a mirroring of his own traveling to Rome?
Of course. A lot of Josephus can be understood as his own experience as reflected in the text which he's writing about, but it's more clearly done when he speaks about Joseph, who left the land of Israel and became in a high position in the court of Pharaoh. And Josephus felt also, and his name was Yosef. So when you are called Yosef, and you write about biblical Yosef, you have a problem, especially if you Yosef, and that Yosef shared the same way of life. Yosef did not write back home to his father. Josephus Flavius was somehow rejected from his family. It's complicated. But you know, your name does a lot. If you are Yael, read the story about Yael. I know you do. And if you are Shaul Chernichovsky, you have a problem with Shaul. And if you are Rachel, the poet Rachel, she writes about Rachel a lot. So the name means a lot to us. And Miriam, we spoke today about Moses' sister Miriam. Okay, you can take an example from this girl who was really behaved beautifully. So let's go to text number C, if there are no questions. Text number C, thank you Shmuel for your question, which is text that scholarship calls the Genesis Apocrypha. This text was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls about 70 years ago. It is written in Aramaic on parchment, and there is no doubt that the text itself is from the 2nd century BCE, and according to scholars, it was composed 100 years earlier. So this is a text that was composed in 2nd century BCE, but copied in a text from the 1st century BCE. It's a very, very old text. Mind you, the Bible did not come into being at that time. At that time still, they debated whether some books should be included in the Bible or not. In the 2nd century BCE, some people had doubts about the Song of Songs. They had doubts about other books in the Bible. It took time till the Bible became the Bible. And when the Bible was still being formed, somebody wrote this text, which the scholarship calls the Genesis Apocryphon. And the surprising part of this text was the fact that this text is retelling the stories of Genesis, but in such a way that the heroes of Genesis are the ones who tell the story. Now we are going to see the story of Abraham in Egypt as told by Abraham himself. Noah is telling the story of the flood. Later on, other stories are being told by the biblical figures themselves. Would you believe 2,200 years ago, someone has the courage and knowledge and security to sit down and rewrite the Bible, but this time not as God's text, but as human beings telling their own experience. And fortunately for us, 2 pages, the scroll was damaged a lot. But 2 pages, 19 and 20, were almost unharmed. And we can read now the English translation of the Aramaic translation text of the Genesis Apocryphon. Where do I have to go? Where do you go now?
I can't.
I know, but you have to go. That's the story. It's a pearl. It's a fascinating creation. And again, I have to stress its old date. 2nd century BCE. Some of the biblical books were just being written at that time. So Abraham is speaking. The we is Abraham. We. We went to the land of Egypt and came to the river Carmon and crossed the 7 branches of the river. Probably the Nile, you know, the Nile and its branches. We passed through our land and entered the land of the sons of Ham, Egypt, into the land of Egypt. And now listen to this. And on the night of our entry into Egypt, I, Abraham, dreamt a dream, and behold, I saw in my dream a cedar tree and a palm tree. You have to know that cedar tree in Hebrew is Erez, it's a masculine. Palm tree in Hebrew is Tamar, is feminine. So he saw two trees, a masculine tree, cedar tree, and a feminine in his dream. And another thing you have to remember, at that time, dream was always considered as a message from God. This is the biblical tradition of dreams. Like Pharaoh dreams, like Joseph dreams, like Jacob dreams. So Abraham had a dream. And in the dream, he saw a cedar tree and palm tree. Men came and they sought to cut down the cedar tree and to pull up its roots, leaving the palm tree standing alone. Abraham is told that the danger is only to the cedar tree. But the palm tree cried out, saying, "Do not cut down the cedar tree, for cursed be he who shall fell it." And the cedar tree was spared because of the palm tree and was not felled. That's the dream. And during the night I woke from my dream, and I say to Sarai, my wife, "I have dreamt a dream, and I am fearful because of this dream." She said to me, "Tell me your dream, that I may know it." So I began to tell her this dream, and told her the interpretation of the dream, that they will seek to kill me, but will spare you. Say to them of me, "He is my brother, and because of you I shall live, and because of you my life shall be saved." And Sarai wept that night on account of my words. Beautiful story. Where did they get it from? I have no idea. But by that, some problems were solved. God is sending Aaron a message. There is real danger to you. And the one who can save you will be Sarah by saying something. So Abraham is not fearing for nothing. He was told by God to be prepared for a real danger that comes to him. So now I jumped many lines in which Abraham gets to Egypt, and Pharaoh at the end, Pharaoh gets information about Sarah. Then the king desired her greatly and sent out at once to take her. And seeing her, he was amazed by all her beauty and took her to be his wife. But me he sought to kill. And then Sarai said to the king, "He is my brother." And so Abraham, was spared because her and was not slain. See the difference? According to the Torah, Sarah and Abraham say, "He is my brother," before anything happens. Here, only when the danger is clear and Pharaoh is almost taking the sword to take off Abraham's head, only here to save Abraham from real death, Sarah is saying, "He is my brother." And I, Abraham, wept aloud that night, I and my nephew Lot, because Sarah had been taken from me by force. We forgot Lot. Abraham has a nephew by the name of Lot, who left Mesopotamia with him and appears later on in the land of Israel. We have to assume that Lot went down with Abraham to Egypt. And now Abraham and Lot together are weeping, and more than that, I prayed that night, and I begged and implored, and I said in my sorrow while my tears went down. Abraham is praying as expected from a believer, speaking to God. "Blessed are you, O Most High God, Lord of all the world, you who are Lord and King of all things, and rules over all the kings of the earth, and judges them all. I cry now before you, my Lord, against Pharaoh of Zoan." Zoan is Egypt, the king of Egypt. "Because of my wife who has been taken from me by force, judge him for me, that I may see your mighty hand raised against him and against all his household, and that he may not be able to defile my wife this night, and that they may know you, my Lord, that you are Lord of all the kings of the earth." Amen. That's a beautiful prayer, 2nd century BCE, put in the mouth of Abraham as we should have expected a biblical story. "And I wept and was sorrowful. And during that night, the Most High God sent a spirit to scourge him." Spirit, an evil spirit, a demon, an evil spirit to his entire household. And it scourged him and his entire household, and he was unable to approach her. And although he was with her for 2 years, he knew her not. 2 years Sarah was kept at Pharaoh, but each time Pharaoh tried to get to her. You enjoy it? Yeah? There's the evil spirit, the demon. And then I skipped about 15 lines in which Lot, little Lot, who we just forgot, he's the one who told Pharaoh that he is suffering because you took my uncle's or my aunt Sarah. And when Pharaoh understands that, he learns from Lot. So again, according to Josephus, Pharaoh find out from his priest. According to the scroll, he found out by Lot. And then he came to Abraham and asked him to pray for him. So I prayed for him, and I laid my hands on his head, and the evil spirit was expelled from him, and he lived. And only now the king rose to tell me he had given her much silver and gold and much raiment of fine linen and purple, and he appointed men to lead me out of all the land of Egypt. And the story goes on. And again, you have seen Josephus did not know the scroll. The scroll, of course, could not know Josephus, but never mind. Two different readers. One in Palestine at that time, that of Israel, one in Rome, one in Greek, one in Aramaic, one as a historian, one as storytelling, tackling the same issues and solve the same problem. There is a prayer. No one touched Sarah. Pharaoh, Abraham never lied, but only in emergency, Sarah had to lie. And there was a dream who foretold Abraham about the danger, etc. I don't have to repeat it. What I find fascinating is the fact that both Josephus and the scroll have no connection, and still they are both part of the pyramid. The Big Bang, that one biblical story, could explode through generation, and we are still only in the 2nd century BCE and Josephus' 1st century. We did not go till modern time, and we won't go much than another text, because the time is short. But I'd like to show you another text, a third one, written in Hebrew by the rabbis in a Midrash, which is a rabbinic compilation of traditions called Tanchuma, Midrash Tanchuma, who couldn't be aware of Josephus. No one read Josephus in Jewish circles, and of course could not know about the Dead Sea Scrolls, who were hidden there for how many years. And again, the writer of this Midrash is again discussing the same issues and gets to a little different solution to the same problems. And here really is the question that I raise with my students. You may say that Josephus assumes his readers could not criticize him because they do not know the Bible. When the scroll was written, 2nd century BCE, maybe the Bible was not yet as important and part of the society as it was later on. But when this Midrash was written, 6th century CE, 6th century CE, the text was already fixed, and it had its authority, and it was read every year in the synagogue, and everybody knew the story, and still a rabbi who wrote this text could retell it by ignoring the problem and telling a new story. As you see now, I hope you enjoyed this one as well. It has even some humor in it. I never say that Midrash is no humor. Listen to this. There was a famine in the land of Canaan. Why? Since God wanted to put Aaron to trial and to make his good deeds known in the world. The famine came in order to see how Aaron would behave. It's a trial. And by going into Egypt, his good deeds will be known to everybody else. Abraham told his wife Sarai, "There is a famine in the land, the likes of which the world had never known. It is fine to dwell in Egypt. Let us go there, where there is much bread and meat." So they went together, and when they arrived to Egypt and stood on the banks of the Nile, and I said, wow, we just read in the scroll that something happened when they crossed the river. Here they stand near the Nile. Abraham saw Sarai's reflection in the river as a dazzling sun. He looks at the river, he sees his wife, wow. He said to her, "Now I know for sure what a beautiful woman you are." He was not sure till this very moment. And the rabbi, listen to this, deduced from this verse that till the time, the mistake is that till the time, not since the time, that till the time he had not looked at her. They were so modest. He never looked at his wife. She went always covered like, you know, the women, at least I've seen in Egypt some study Arabian women, going just to see the eyes, right? But in Jerusalem also you can see women are totally covered, only the eyes are popping out. So Abraham never saw Sarah before. And even now, he didn't look at Sarah, he looked at the water. But he saw the reflection of her beauty. Then, well, now I know how beautiful you are. I know, he told her, that the Egyptians are full of lust for women. We read it already, Josephus. So I will hide you in a locked chest, since I'm afraid for your life and mine. That's the innovation of this text. Abraham tried to bring Sarah into Egypt without being seen by no one, by putting her in a chest, closing the chest, and trying to go through custom with this chest without Sarah being seen. At the time of the Midrash, people had to pay custom, taxes, when they came from country to another country. So Abraham probably came with a lot of chests, and he hoped that in one of them he can hide Sarah and somehow sneak her into Egypt. So, when he came to the tax collectors, they ordered him, pay the tax. He said, I will pay. They asked him, do you have vessels in this chest? He replied, I will pay this tax on vessels. They asked him, are you bringing silk garments? More expensive. He said, I will pay the tax on silk garments. They asked, are you bringing pearls? He said, I will pay the tax on pearls. Just don't open the bags. I'll pay any tax. They told him, we cannot let you go on your way until you open the chest. And we see what it contains. When they opened it, all the land of Egypt was resplendent with her light. She was a little pearl. When the tax officials see Sarai, they claimed, this one is not suitable for a commoner, but for the king, and Sarai was led to the king's court. There is no lie, my sister, everything else, but Abraham did his best to go into Egypt without Sarah being seen. But, you don't mess with tax collectors. Sometimes they really, know the job. When Abraham saw that Sarai had been taken to the palace of Pharaoh, he began to weep and pray to God. Again, this source also felt that a prayer is needed. And he prayed to God, Master of the universe, act for the sake of my belief in you and show us your mercy and grace. And for the feminist of you, Sarai too cried out, saying, Master of the universe, when I heard from Abraham that you had told him, go forth, I believed in what you said. Now I remain alone, apart from my father, my mother, and my household. Husband, will this wicked one come and abuse me? Act for your great name and for my trust in your words. God replied, by your life, nothing untoward will happen to you and your husband.
So God answered only to her,
to her,
not to Abraham.
No, but we are relieved again. We were afraid that nothing will happen. God is promising to Sarah, nothing will happen to you. At that moment, an angel descended from heaven with a whip in his hand. Pharaoh came to remove Sarah's shoe, he hit him on the hand. You may laugh, it's funny. Pharaoh did not laugh, I promise you, but the story is this. He wanted to touch her clothing, he smote him. All that night the angel stood there with the whip. If Sarai bade him strike, he would strike him. If she told him cease, he ceased. Pharaoh was not the only one who was punished. His ministers, slaves, walls, pillars, vessels, and all things were similarly stricken, in afflictions which were worse than any affliction that ever came or would ever come upon human beings. And again you see, this text was written to people who know the biblical story. No word is mentioned here about money given to Abraham, not before and not at the end. Nothing happened to Sarah. The angel made sure of that. There is no lie, my brother. I mean, the whole story is totally different. And the real problem which I have as a scholar of Midrash, and I admit it's a real problem, how was this text accepted by its readers in the 6th century and onward? I don't know, but all I know that even this very day, there are enough people, naive people, who will accept this story on its face value. That's what really happened. And when you ask them, but look, the biblical text is a little different, they would say, well, in the start stuttering or whatever, But since the authority of the rabbis and their text is so great in Judaism since ancient times, people really would not be too occupied with this problem, and they can live schizophrenically speaking, the schizophrene, with the biblical text that it is, and the Midrashic text that it is, without really trying to somehow compromise them into one story. And I'm not sure that's the best solution I have to this problem, but that's what I see when I speak with my students, especially the religious one, really believe in the sanctity of this text and would not even think to doubt them. How can you live in both worlds, the Midrashic and the biblical one, and somehow stay alive? So you have seen, I hope, although we read the text very quickly, it was just a short three texts only. We could have continued, see what the Talmud is saying, and later on Middle Ages commentators, like the famous Rashi and others, and what's done later on, till this very day. No biblical text, no biblical verse, no biblical word, and sometimes no biblical letter was exempted from this big bank of information, of activity, of dealing with, that is still being done till this very day by writers, both Jewish and Christians or whatever, and no human being can ever cover the amount of material that was written under the influence of the Bible, and even not under the influence of one biblical book, and sometimes even one biblical chapter. With my students, we discussed the story of the Bible of Isaac in Genesis 22. This chapter by itself, till this very day, is still one of the most discussed story in the Bible, in all circles of writers, artists. They speak about art, artists and writers in film and in any media that come into mind, because that's the idea of the Big Bang. One text which gives birth to a burst of information and creation till this very day. In modern Israel, it's very common every day to see a song, a poem, a film, a book that's something to do with the Bible, and I assume the same is true in the Western culture and even in the Muslim culture, sometimes to less extent, because in Islam the Quran took the place of the Bible, as opposed to Christianity, in which the Bible became the Old Testament but did not lose its sanctity. In Islam, the Quran was understood as a text that replaced both the New Testament and the Bible. But still, in my copy of the Quran, I must admit, don't tell it to no one, in my copy of the Quran, I just marked every time a biblical figure is mentioned. And there's almost no one page of the Quran in which Abraham, Yusuf, Joseph, David, others mentioned. So even in Islam, the Bible is part of the foundation that gave birth to a lot of creations. And if I go back to what Yaakov said, I'll end by that if you don't have any question. This was one example of the Big Bang of one biblical story, and I'll tell you, we hardly covered 1/10 or 1/20 of the material that this story goes to. But for the idea of text being a the beginning for a creation, as the Big Bang was for our universe, I think this example is a nice one. I like especially the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the funny parts of the story of the Midrash, and all of them are very vivid, and it's fun to teach them as well and to read them as well. So what if they do not agree with the biblical story? They do not. Okay. Any question which you think that I may not answer, I would like to listen. I mean that no question means that I was clear enough and you understood what I was saying.
No question? So just before you're leaving, we're so blessed to have you for another week. If we could have more, we will ask for more, but only one more.
You're so nice.
No, but I just want to thank Professor Shinan, mostly not only about the knowledge, but about the way that he's teaching. I think you're amazing way to make those things accessible for all of us and so interesting. As to.The, and I think we can.